Imagine waking in the middle of the night, not because of noise, or a dream, or restlessness, but simply because your body decided it was time. Why did people in the Middle Ages break their nights into two separate sleeps, with an hour or more of wakefulness in between? In this video, we'll look at how they spent those quiet hours, what activities filled the candlelit dark, and what this rhythm of rest reveals about their work, spirituality, and anxieties. In the pre-industrial world, sleeping in one continuous block was the unusual option. For most of history stretching from the ancient world through medieval Europe and well into the early modern period, people followed what scholars now describe as first sleep and second sleep. The initial stretch began shortly after nightfall, particularly during winter when darkness seemed endless. It lasted 3 or 4 hours of deep slumber. Then, without clocks or alarms, men and women stirred naturally around midnight. This was no cause for concern. Legal records, diaries, and even medical treatises all mentioned first and second sleep, as if everyone knew exactly what they meant. One French doctor in the 1500s even recommended the interval as the ideal time for study or quiet thought. English plays and stories casually mentioned characters rising after first sleep to continue their tasks. Roman authors also hint that this pattern of broken rest was familiar even centuries earlier. It's important to recognize that this was not rare or eccentric. Whether you worked farmland in England, sold goods in the markets of Florence, or chanted prayers in a cloister, this dual sleep cycle defined the rhythm of your nights. Though customs shifted with geography and season, the basic structure remained consistent. Sleep came in two pieces, with a natural intermission in the middle. What we might now diagnose as insomnia was, for them, simply normal. In fact, many people valued that midnight pause, a pocket of time when the world slowed, quiet, and unhurried. Before electricity or reliable street lighting, darkness governed life. Once the sun slipped away, people relied on the moon, stars, and the faint glow of fire or candle. A medieval village after sunset sank into a near total shadow. Fires or candles were costly to maintain, so most households allowed the dark to rule. This lack of artificial brightness shaped biology in ways we now understand better. Without lamps keeping the brain alert, melatonin surged earlier, nudging people into drowsiness soon after dusk. Especially in winter, when night could last 14 hours, dividing it into two manageable phases of rest was only practical. In cold seasons, first sleep usually began right after supper, often before 9 p.m., while summer's shorter nights shifted the schedule. Still, the habit persisted across the calendar. In this slower-paced world, evening hours were precious for chores, meals, and securing the home before bed. Families might gather briefly at the hearth to share stories, prayers, or small tasks like sewing, but exhaustion quickly pressed them to their beds. Sleeping arrangements varied widely. A farmer might rest on straw piled into a wooden frame, often beside family members to share body heat. Wealthier households owned feather mattresses, thick blankets, or canopy beds designed to trap warmth. Wherever they lay, the first phase of sleep lasted 3 to 4 hours and was considered the body's deepest restoration. Modern science would identify it as slow-wave sleep, the stage when tissues repair, memories consolidate, and energy stores refill. When first sleep ended, people woke clear-headed, not groggy. Rising in the middle of the night felt natural, almost expected. The house stirred quietly. Coals were coaxed back into flame. Voices stayed low. The question is, what did they do during those watchful hours between sleeps? This interval was a twilight zone, neither night nor day, neither labor nor leisure. People awoke without urgency, guided by the slow rhythm of nature rather than ticking clocks. Beyond the shutters, the outdoors remained black, but inside, dim lights flickered. The glow of the hearth, the soft shimmer of candles, created a pocket of life against the dark. For many, it was a time of devotion. Manuals on prayer urged worshippers to speak to God during these hushed hours, when the silence of the world made the divine feel closer. Others used the time for practical chores, feeding the fire, checking on animals, or soothing restless children. Mothers often nursed infants during this period. Some used it for contemplation, thinking through the day's worries or quietly planning the next. With no distraction from the sunlit world, attention turned inward to faith, family, or personal fears. People often used this midnight pause to recall their dreams, reflect on worries, or plan what awaited them at daybreak. Sometimes, neighbors slipped across the dark lanes to visit. Though roads were unlit, the glow of a nearby hearth or candle could act as a quiet invitation. This interval also gave couples space for intimacy, away from the busyness of daylight labor. Rather than wasted hours, these middle-of-the-night moments carried meaning and structure, forming an accepted rhythm that artificial light has all but erased from modern life. After a spell of stillness, usually an hour or more, families drifted back to bed for what they called the second sleep. This final stretch bridged the deep of night with the pale edge of dawn. Unlike the first sleep-heavy and restorative, the second was softer, filled with lighter dreams and drowsy awareness. Still, it mattered. This return to rest eased both body and mind into the coming day. In farming villages, its timing depended on the season. During winter, people often remained under blankets long after the sun had risen, keeping warm before chores began. In summer, the second sleep ended earlier, broken by the need to tend fields at first light. A rooster's crow was often the only alarm clock. In towns and larger settlements, the routine was tighter. Bakers, brewers, and others who needed to begin before sunrise often shortened this second rest or gave it up entirely. For the majority, though, it was simply the accepted way to finish the night. There was no guilt, no notion of laziness. It was a cycle followed for generations. To those who lived it, this dual sleep pattern wasn't quaint tradition. It was reality. Only with industrial schedules and electric light did it begin to seem unusual. And the practice wasn't just practical. It was also reinforced by both medical theories and spiritual beliefs. Physicians of the Middle Ages, leaning on the legacy of Greek and Roman thinkers, argued that digestion, body heat, and even mental clarity depended on the timing of sleep. Many recommended lying down soon after eating to aid the stomach, then rising later before returning to bed. Religion gave the habit a deeper weight. Monastic orders organized their lives around fixed hours of prayer, with vigils or matins often falling in the midnight silence. Lay people, though not bound to the cloister, absorbed the sense that prayer in those hours carried special power. Preachers encouraged it, and devotional guides described night as a time when the soul was more open to God. Even outside the church, people felt the stillness between sleep's heightened perception. Some believed dreams before the first waking carried symbolism or prophecy, while those before the second waking reflected reality. Thus, the cycle was not just necessity, but also considered healthy, spiritually valuable, and even divinely supported. Night served not only the body, but also the mind and spirit. For many households, the space between sleeps was far from solitary. In rooms where several shared one bed, parents, children, servants, or occasional guests, it became a chance to speak without the press of daytime chores. Whispers might cover family affairs or local gossip, voices softened under the creak of beams and the crackle of embers. It could also be a time for settling quarrels. In cramped homes where tempers often ran high, the night's calmness made words gentler, anger less sharp. In rural villages, neighbors within walking distance sometimes called on each other during these hours. Urgent matters, births, sick animals, or sudden threats were the usual reasons. But at times, it was simple companionship, the sight of a candle in the dark offering reassurance. Shared sleeping arrangements themselves created intimacy. Whether among relatives or co-workers, the pause between sleeps gave that closeness a chance to be reinforced or carefully managed. Midnight was never an empty gap. It was a moment for nurturing relationships, for bonds to be renewed in hushed tones. Not all used it for talk or rest. For certain trades, the hours after first waking were prime for work. Bakers were the most familiar example. Dough prepared earlier needed kneading, shaping, and baking before morning customers arrived. Fires were stoked. Ovens heated midnight marked the real start of the shift. Millers sometimes labored as well, taking advantage of cooler, steady air for grinding. In damp winters and short days, nighttime production ensured flour and bread were ready by sunrise. Watchmen, too, belonged to the world of night labor. In towns, they guarded streets, checked gates, and kept ears open for fire, one of the great fears of the age. Their quiet patrols made them among the few who saw their cities bathed in moonlight. Even in farming areas, night work was practical. Farmers might rise to check their animals, ward off predators, or ready tools for the following day. During harvest, when days were brutally hot, gathering grain sometimes began well before dawn. For these people, the middle of the night was not downtime, but the heartbeat of work itself. In the hushed hours before dawn, the medieval world was already stirring, its routines quietly shifting toward the coming day. The pattern of two separate sleeps began to wane during the 18th and 19th centuries, undone by sweeping social and technological change. The earliest disruption came from light, not merely candles and oil lamps, but the arrival of gas illumination, followed later by electricity. For the first time, cities could remain active long past sunset, freeing people from dependence on natural darkness. Nights filled with theater, coffee houses, and lively gatherings. Bedtimes moved later, compressing the night into a single stretch of continuous rest. The Industrial Revolution accelerated the transformation. Factory life required precise timing and uniform schedules. The leisurely break in the middle of the night, when one could rise, stretch, or linger by the fire, was incompatible with the 6 a.m. factory whistle. Employers demanded workers sharp and ready for long, uninterrupted days, and that meant encouraging one long period of slumber. City living pushed the change further. Overcrowded homes, thin partitions, and constant noise stripped away the appeal of quiet midnight wakefulness. As households shrank and bed-sharing faded, the communal aspects of the midnight interval vanished as well. Without conversation or shared warmth, the waking gap between sleeps lost its purpose. By the dawn of the 20th century, much of the Western world had abandoned the pattern entirely. The language of first sleep and second sleep disappeared. What had been a standard rhythm for centuries became a forgotten oddity, remembered only through old manuscripts, legal references, or the fading recollections of elders. Today, science is reconsidering what the Middle Ages took for granted. Studies in sleep science show that when artificial light is stripped away and people follow only natural cycles, they often return to a two-part sleep. In controlled settings, subjects nod off shortly after dusk, wake for about an hour in the middle of the night, and then slip back into another round of rest. This implies that segmented sleep may be closer to human biology than the modern 8 straight hours ideal. What we now call insomnia, waking in the night and struggling to return to sleep, may actually be an echo of this older rhythm resurfacing. For those accustomed to constant brightness and noise, the thought of rising in darkness to think, pray, or work quietly may seem strange. Yet for centuries, people cherished that interval as much as daylight itself. It offered a mental calm merely absent from today's world, a pause outside the demands of both work and leisure. Some researchers even suggest that experimenting with a 2-phase sleep schedule could help people with restlessness, allowing them to align with their natural cycles instead of resisting them. While we cannot fully recreate the environment of a medieval night, the principle of respecting the body's innate timing still resonates. The history of segmented sleep is more than a discarded medieval habit. It reminds us that earlier generations lived closer to the rhythms of nature than we do now. They treated the night as layered, not uniform, and found meaning in the silence between rests. In that interval they prayed, labored, loved, and contemplated, things we now cram into daylight hours. To discover more forgotten patterns and hidden customs of the past, subscribe to Medieval History, where the Middle Ages return to life one tale at a time.